Okay, I now want to introduce Eli Goodman. He's a Media Evangelist at comScore. Eli, great to have you back. You did an excellent talk last year, so we definitely wanted to have you back. He's got a little bit of a cold, by the way, so I think he's probably going to stand behind the podium, which he normally loves to walk around, but we'll see. Eli leads the business development and research team for comScore's product specialty division, where he plays an integral role in educating the industry on how to best merge marketing functions across platforms. He is a 12-year veteran of the technology and market research industry. Prior to joining comScore, Eli worked at Hitwise and Gartner. The stage is yours, Eli.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that rousing applause for my return 1 year later. You guys, I got to tell you, I was pretty excited when I got the call to come back and do this show again, because I speak at a lot of events. It's kind of cool sometimes, kind of sucks, a lot of travel. But I got to tell you guys is that this is the most fun I had at any event last year. You domainers know how to party. Like, I was impressed. Like, I definitely was in a hurt locker by the time I got out of here, and but was happy to get the call again, even though I'm coming back a little bit sick. A couple of the things I'll just say before I get into the actual meat of the presentation. Opening a conference, the opening keynote is my favorite slot, right? Because you don't have anybody else to compare me against. As far as you're concerned, I'm fresh, new, the smartest, loudest, best guy that you guys have heard. But I'll tell you, I have 3 slots I'd just like to mention for you guys to think about that are pretty much in, let's say, reverse sucking order. The worst slots you can get, so if you ever get stuck with these, deal with it. And I actually came upon a 4th, something new that I am doing soon. 3rd worst slot that you could possibly have, last slot, last day. 4:30 p.m., last day of a conference. Nobody wants to be there. You're basically between people and alcohol or home or airplanes or anything else that they want to be doing besides sitting there listening to you. 2nd worst, has got to be the post-lunch slot. Right after lunch, everybody's in a food coma, totally asleep. Don't care. They're like, yeah, whatever. They're still milling around, talking. People are smoking cigarettes, doing their thing, sort of, meandering back in. It's a half-empty room. Up until very recently, I always thought the number 1 worst slot that you could possibly have, and I had this 2 weeks ago, 9 a.m. Vegas, any day of the week. Okay? Showed up. I mean, literally, there must have been, I was at the SHOT Show. Anybody familiar with that? It's like a great big guns and ammo, totally fun, right? I'm a city slicker. I live in New York City. I got pictures of me with shotguns and stuff. It was pretty fun. But 9 a.m., I'm sitting there. I'm at a conference. I mean, there must have been 4 people, and 3 of them worked for the company that would sponsor me to be there. So I always thought that was the worst, but in fact, I just got dealt what is my new most unfavorite one is 9 a.m. day after the Super Bowl. Okay, I cannot believe that somebody set that up on my Marcom team, but it has to happen, so I will deal with it. Anyway, just to give you guys a sense, you guys are my favorite slot, so thank you for coming. Now, so let's talk, anybody that saw me last year, we did a big state of the internet, what's going on. I wanted to completely shift it up this year. So A, you guys aren't seeing like old, tired stuff. But second, what's really hot, like what's happening, and that's why the Internet Vital Signs this year, I want to talk about It's a Social World. Top 10 things you need to know about social networking across the world, how it differs between here in the US, males and females, what's happening in different types of social networks, and where it's headed. So let's go ahead. Oh, wrong button. You see, I'm sick. I can't even pay attention. I was blanking out. Now, top 10 things. What are we going to talk about today? Your need to know. Social networking, most popular online activity. Shocking, right? I know it's a big deal, but I think when we run some of the stats, there'll actually be some surprising figures in there. Behavior on social networking, it transcends and reflects regional differences, right? Not everybody, the way they use Facebook or the way they use Twitter or whatever their local thing is not necessarily the same. I think there'll be some things in there that are worthy to note. The importance of Facebook can't be overstated. Anybody here use Facebook? Right, couple people, right, kind of a big deal. Kind of bullish on what they have going on. We talk about the IPO though, we'll see. Microblogging, anybody in here a microblogger? Heard of microblogging, use it in any capacity? Well, I'll tell you guys, actually, it's a much bigger thing than you might be aware of. Tumblr, things of that nature, like what's been happening there. Local social networks, not everything is Facebook. Not everything is Twitter. LinkedIn. I think there's some bigger players that are coming in around different markets around the world that would be worth noting. It's not just young people. It's not just what we call digital natives. Under the age of 24, essentially, is how we define that. We'll talk a little bit about the demographic breakdown. You can see social networking leads an online display. A couple interesting things there. Being the biggest doesn't mean you necessarily get the most money. So I think there's a lot of opportunity we'll talk about there. The next disruptors, right? If you guys will talk about what's happened between 2007 and now, a lot has changed. And then mobile, right? How does all of this fit into mobile? How do mobile devices play into this? What are we seeing? What are we going to see? Things to be on the lookout for. Social networking is global, right? So I want you guys to think of 2007. I think everybody here remembers 2007. Stuff was happening, we were living, whatever was going on, there was no recession. But what was happening as far as how people were consuming and communicating across the internet? You could see it was actually email was the #1 most popular way that people communicated across the internet. And these numbers, by the way, unless I say otherwise, are based on PC, like in home and work computer usage. So we're not going to talk about mobile till later on. You could see about 528 million people. That's how people around the world were communicating via email. You could see in social networking was only about 56%, so it was certainly up and coming. It wasn't brand new at that stage, but it had not taken on the point of dominance that we're going to see here in just a second in 2011. I love this quote. Anybody familiar? Thomas Friedman. He's big on globalization. Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Done tons of stuff. I love this quote when he talked about. Anybody here read "The World Is Flat"? It's like one of those business books that you see at the airport. I get stuck reading those. Real exciting. But I mean, pretty good, very interesting stuff if you're into it. But you guys can see what he's saying. Facebook didn't exist 2004. Twitter was a sound. The cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking place. And Skype for most people was a typo. And all of that changed in just the last 6 years, right? So now you can imagine, we come forward to 2011. You guys, a full 82, almost 83% of everybody on the planet that is using the internet in some capacity is accessing social networking. You're talking about 1.2 billion people worldwide. And you can see what's happened as it relates to email and instant messengers. So talk about another 4 years, another 6 years. I'd be really interested to see where we're going to be. But that statistic, you can see that number, how much that has grown. And this is not even including the mobile, right? The way that people are interacting really is why this is sort of the overarching umbrella as to when you think about the internet and how things are going to be going and the way that people are going to be communicating and changing ideas. Social networking is not just a buzzword for fun. Now, the media landscape has changed, right? It's influenced by social networking. A couple different things we'll talk about as we go. Social networking, most popular activity. I want to give you guys some numbers here as far as how big is it now in comparison to just growth across the entire internet. That top line, that 88%, is the size of just the pure internet audience across the entire world since 2007, up 88%, right? A lot more people getting access to computers, PCs, accessing the internet for a variety of different things, old and young, third world countries, wherever, anywhere in between. But social networking is up 174%, and I, in fact, wouldn't be surprised over the course of the next few years if eventually those start to cross over with each other, right? The social networking, pretty much almost everybody that accesses the net is going to be using social networking at one time or another. And as people begin to get connected, they begin immediately connecting with one another. That is, in fact, something that's been very interesting about when you think about what do people do online, right? They buy stuff. You'd see they read things. They talk to people, communicate. Social networking, just as we define it as an industry, in fact, 1 in every 5 minutes that's spent online is spent on social networking sites, social networking in some capacity. I would say that's pretty considerable, right? If you guys look at the number of billions, right, we're talking, upwards of 30, 35 billion hours a month where people are spending their time worldwide, 1 in 5. And you can see how much smaller the dark blue one there on the top was just 4 years ago. The second thing to be able to think about, it's a social world. We're talking about where we're going. Social networking behavior, it transcends or reflects regional differences, right? Not everybody's created the same. Now, despite differences in government, you think of things like the Arab Spring and lots of different things that were going on with social networking, or what the United States is like and how that might differ culturally from Japan and whatnot. Social networking is growing around the world across the board. What you guys see, those numbers there is a breakdown of the percentage of people in like major internet markets. This is about the 40 some odd countries that we at comScore track and measure, or at least break out independently right now. Look at the percentage of people across the board that are accessing social networking. It's It's a lot of 90s in there, right? That's a lot of people that are accessing social networking in some capacity. Totally can't believe I didn't think of this a few years ago, right? But just a couple things, just because everybody's accessing it doesn't mean that it's the same, in every place that you go. 1/3 of the world's social networkers are in Asia-Pac, right? As far as size, when you talk about pure size, Asia-Pac, far and away the biggest. You guys can see a full 1/3. But 5 of the most engaged markets is in the amount of time per person, per hour that you're spending on social networking is in Latin America. Now, why is that? It's actually an interesting question. So my sister-in-law is from Colombia, and I asked her, so what do you think? She's not super internet lady, but she's certainly part of Team Mom, so she's on Twitter and Facebook, putting up pictures of my nieces all the time, things like that. And she said, well, it's simple. You've met my family. There's a lot of us, and we like to talk. And I was like, okay, so that's the reason. So let's say that is her idea behind it. But I can't necessarily say for any particular reason why Latin America is so engaged. But it's certainly something we see not just from a social networking perspective, but also for things like search. In fact, you guys know Colombia, most search country on the planet, over 230 searches per person on average per month. Here in the US, it's about like 120. Anyway, just a little factoid to add to it. But you can see as you think about just the different regions and how people are using social networking. Latin America, you can see, 28% share. 28% of the time in Latin America spent online is spent in social networking versus only 11%, for the Asia-Pac folks, that 1/3. So it's not just about volume, but it's also about consumption, engagement, are terms that we tend to use. So you just want to think about different regions around the world are different in different capacities. And then even to break that down, not just from total, right? We're looking at it in a macro sense, but even to whittle it down a little bit to average hours per person. Over 7.5 hours per month in Latin America. Anybody here feel like they spend over 7.5 hours per month on social networking? That's a lot of hours, right? It's a lot of hours. But then again, it's even when you think about television, you don't necessarily, when they say people on average watch, 30 or, some odd hours a month, you don't want to think about it that you do it that way, but you actually do. So I bet you that a lot of people in here actually spend a lot more time on social networking than they think. And also, across all regions, women are way more social. This has been since the beginning of social networking. You can see those orange lines there. That represents the average engagement with social networking for women. It's just larger in every single region around the planet. Men are definitely, catching up in some capacity, which we'll talk about a little later on. But, just remember, it's women are definitely call it the target market and the heavy users at this stage as it relates to social networking. And that's similar across the planet in every single region. Facebook, kind of important, right? It's kind of a big deal. But let's put some figures around that. How actually important is Facebook, not just in the context of social networking, but also around the entire planet? You guys see Facebook is the number 3 worldwide site rank as far as unique visitors. Google, which includes Google and YouTube, number 1. And in fact, Microsoft and all of the various Microsoft sites around the world is number 2. So 55% of the entire online global population visits Facebook during any given month. It's pretty big, right? That's a pretty big number. But if you just want to look at it as a function of social networking, 3 out of 4 social networking minutes are spent on Facebook. Talk about having pretty good market share, right? It's a big deal. And then if you even back it up a little bit, not just social networking, but just as a function of the entire online ecosystem, 1 in 7 minutes spent online is spent on Facebook. 1 in 7 on one site. Again, pretty impressive. So when you think about why Facebook, we talk about it all the time, and it has its own movie, and they're going to have the biggest IPO in tech history and all these other goodies. What's happening across the world, right? Because it's not as if Facebook has always been number 1. Right, in every place. We think of it here in the United States, but there are other places around the world where it isn't necessarily the biggest. Talk about that in a sec, but since 2010, you guys can see it's actually taken the lead in 6 markets across Asia, Latin America, Europe. Some other places you might be familiar with, or other websites, I'm sure you're familiar with these countries. Windows Live Profile, you could see Orkut, you could see Wretch, Yahoo Wretch in Taiwan. So some different places where it's just sort of crossed the divide, where it just became too popular, like the momentum was just too strong. You can see it's now at about 788 million unique visitors as of October. And here, though, if we were to flip it a little bit, there's still only 6 markets in the entire planet where Facebook is not the #1 social network. And you can see, Poland, China, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam. Actually, just last night I sent this over to Corinne, part of the Domainfest team, oversee team, in order to break this down. And in fact, I saw I had older data. Just as of January, you guys, Brazil fell off that list. Orkut had been the biggest one in Brazil right up until January, and it finally crossed over. So again, those 6 are getting ready to fall like dominoes. A couple of those selections from the ones that are not currently Facebook is #1. I did want to break down what is #1, or what are the #1s in those particular countries. You can see Japan, Twitter's #1, Facebook certainly catching up. You can see Poland, Facebook's about to take over. A couple there in Russia, and I'm going to talk about these in a minute. And VK.com is what the one on top is what it's called, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. The other one, Odnoklasniki. Anybody here Russian? Am I even close on that? Anyway, you guys fill me in later if I was able to figure it out. And then Naver, you can see, has been fighting back and forth with Cyworld in South Korea, but we certainly intend to see Facebook will be making a push there at any given time. So, different regions, different things, but the fact is Facebook is pretty ubiquitous across the board and is reaching to the point where it's going to be #1 in most every market very soon. 2012, maybe. We'll see if I'd be able to see, but I'll tell you by the end of 2012, that list will probably be down to 3, maybe 2, maybe even 1. Now, microblogging has emerged as a big force. This is, whenever you think about, social networking, a lot of the time you start to get caught up in, well, it's done. It's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's LinkedIn, it's over. No more new players. But in fact, there's always going to be innovation in any given area as it relates to, whether it be the internet or any type of technology. But in this instance, microblogging has actually taken on much more strength than you guys would imagine. Now, microblogging, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially just an online blog, but instead of somebody sitting down and writing some sort of long mantra that could be pages and pages long, it's sort of like the Twitter of microblogging, right? The idea that you would have a blog, but it's like little short form updates. So yes, it's sort of content, you post pictures, different things. Twitter certainly is a big player in the world of microblogging, reaches 1 in 10 global users online. So we'll talk a little bit about what do people actually tweet about. I love this slide as I began to think about what's high on that list, right? I think about what I tweet about. I have a business account, I'm kind of a dork, so I'm sitting here just talking about, here are columns that I wrote or things going on in search or data or something like that. Nothing fun and cool about, what I ate for breakfast, I guess. But you guys can see if you look at the 10 most tweeted moments of 2011, starting with New Year, of course, this is sort of like an average number of tweets per second. A lot of sports stuff. Anybody here sports fans? I'm a big sports fan. So these are certainly things, that I actually was reading tweets on. But Steve Jobs, both when he resigns and when he passed away, became incredibly important in the tech community, but also people that weren't just into tech. Steve Jobs, a serious icon. You could see actually the MTV Video Music Awards were #1. Does anybody know, I gotta be honest, I didn't watch it this year, so was there something crazy that happened at the Video Music Awards this year? Anybody just want to shout it out, or was it just sort of the standard teenagers watching kids do stuff? Like when Madonna and Britney made out, things like that in the past. Nothing good. Okay, so if somebody get back to me if anybody knows and is too embarrassed to be like, yeah, I totally watched it, I know what's going on. But you guys can see it's the most tweeted moment of 2011, at least as far as an event is concerned. But other microblogging services are on the rise. So it's not just Twitter, right? That's the #1, short form updates about stuff. But Tumblr, anybody here read Tumblr? Follow anybody on Tumblr? Definitely should check it out. It's very big. I mean, you're talking about 166 plus million total unique visitors worldwide. Weibo, it's big in China. So, if you're reading in Chinese, maybe it could be important. But a couple things when you think about services that are on the rise, stuff that, didn't exist a few years ago, and everybody said it was over, you can never get in and have a new social network. A couple different things that are actually making plays. Now, local social networks. These are finally being able to make some inroads globally. Like in any given place around the world, you go to a social network because that's where your friends are, right? You don't just randomly join a social network. You want to be, well, this is where my friends are, so that's why I'm on Facebook, or it used to be Friendster, or you're on Twitter and you want to follow celebrities, your fake friends, whatever it's going to be. But the fact is, that's the starting point for most any given social network, but once it begins to reach out beyond a local community is when it really begins to build up some juice. So, couple things. Let's talk about some of the United States-based ones. You guys see Facebook, Twitter, Windows Live, LinkedIn. It's that orange on the bottom represents the percentage of their user base, their unique visitors, that are in the United States. So look at that. I mean, think about that. And this is pretty similar across the board for most, any United States property, but something that when you see that in social networking is when it's sort of that, the tipping point. We'll use a little Malcolm Gladwell. But, as you begin to reach that point where you have more users from an international market versus where you began, tends to be a very important moment in any social network. And a couple things you see LinkedIn. Pretty bullish on LinkedIn. I really like what they have going on, right? Because I'm dude in the world of business that links in with people. So link into me, it'd be cool, be friends. But you can see 5 of the top 10 markets, highest for LinkedIn penetration are in Western Europe. So definitely this is moving in a sort of like first world Western culture society direction. Let's say from LinkedIn, you can see Netherlands, Ireland, Denmark, et cetera. But a couple of the others, this is what I mentioned before about, the local ones in Russia. You saw the, VK and the one that I'm not going to try and pronounce again, but somebody's going to get me the actual pronunciation later. But you can see as far as their inside Russia perspective, 57, 59%, but they finally began to break out. So that's what we consider to be a top tier global network is once you start to get outside of your native market. So when you guys are sitting there thinking of which social networks are worth it, if you're looking at some data, being able to understand if they have 99% of their users are in one country, wherever it's based. Yeah, that's cool and all, even if it's a big country, but it's not really until it starts to reach out into other, societies and other, let's say, countries and regions and different types of languages is really when you start to see that, the domino fall. So with VK and the other Russian one, things to be able to be on the lookout for. So local, right? Local, certainly bigger players. It's not just Facebook as well. Also, young people. I used to joke around, I remember a few years ago, I've been doing this for enough years. I remember a few years ago we used to joke around when I would go visit clients or go see somebody in their office in some capacity. And we'd talk about, it would be a joke of what the makeup was of the different, say, groups within the office. You used to have the display advertising guys were like classic ad sales dudes, so they were always in ties, in suits and whatnot. And then you had the search guys, which were a little bit more like, hip Google types, right? And then we would always make the joke that the social media was, like the one guy with like 4 earrings, a nose ring, blue hair, and that was the thing. Anybody remember that time when it used to be like, yeah, social media guy, whatever, right? That's not funny at all to any of you, because you were the blue hair dude. But anyway, the point is, it's interesting, it's not just that anymore, right? It certainly has reached that critical mass where it's everybody across the board. So that's not just I use that as an example from a professional perspective, but this also plays out as it relates to who are social media users. You can see, we talked beforehand, women, big into social media, males, and in fact, users over the age of 55 represent the fastest growing segment. See some breakdowns, male, female, across the board. Certainly, everything is up, right? Everybody's up as far as percentage reach is concerned. But it's getting into, that's why I talked about LinkedIn beforehand, because LinkedIn is very heavy on males and also very heavy on males over the age of 55, which from an advertising perspective is a particularly valuable group, right? Hard to find online. And seeing that huge growth, it's driven by a lot of that business stuff, but also, Facebook, Twitter, these other things are still having a play. But just to be able to give you a sense, it's not just the blue-haired, 4-ring, nose ring guy, right? So, now, women spend more time than men, but the gender gap is narrowing for the younger demographics. So you can start to see, you guys can easily look at those bar graphs and see how they look next to each other, but you can see ages 15 to 24 males are almost on the same level, as it relates to the females with, the number of hours per visitor over the course of the month. So, as like with anything, right, as a younger generation keeps getting older and there's more of a younger generation and they start pushing into the older, I think we're going to continue to see this. Not to mention that the younger kids tend to be like early adopters of stuff, right? So, I feel that you'll start to have, let's call it like that late majority, late adopter type of thing. It'll start to push up that list. And another year from now, in fact, maybe it'll be much closer to 50-50. We'll have to see. Digital natives. Anybody in here a digital native? Anybody wish they were still a digital native? So, like, I sit next to a girl at the office who just turned, 30, 32. She is convinced that she's a digital native. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't mean to burst your bubble. I mean, you're looking good. You're 30, it's cool. But, digital native, like really, because I can have this discussion that I'm in my let's say in my 30s, right? I can tell you guys is at the office, right? At any office, you have kids fresh out of college, right? You're doing their thing. And I was talking to them, and they were like, so how did you guys get together when you were going out without, because no cell phones? And I was like, well, you called the house, and you said, I'll be at these bars, maybe, at these times, catch you later, right? So they couldn't get their arms around it, just couldn't even believe that went on. But I was like, well, let me throw it back at you guys. I don't know how you guys survived in college when every single moment, you guys think about college, right? Think about what goes on, is every single moment could easily just be picture up, spread throughout the world. Like how distressing that would be just to think back to all of those moments. So there's good and bad on both sides of this, but I'd just like to point that out. If you had a cell phone in college, you're probably a digital native or getting close to it. I feel that that's where we start to get into it. But we've already defined what digital natives are, but there's definitely a lot of things that they're driving like long term. And again, when I think of that group as early adopters, you can see, if you look at that, minus 42% on the left-hand side, 15 to 24-year-olds are pretty much abandoning email, right, as far as communication goes. It's the largest decline in engagement with any of the different social networking categories. And you can see, but at the same time, they also saw the highest increase in social networking. Facebook me, put it on Twitter, I read it on Twitter, right, whatever it is. There's no more like emails. Anybody chain letters? You would forward this to 10 people, and it's amazing to me, but that was not that long ago, and it was definitely the way to go. My dad still does it. My dad loves to send me things through long chains of emails, and I'm like, bro, really? Are we still doing this? But I texted him a picture of me at that SHOT Show with a shotgun. He couldn't even show it to my mom. He's like, well, I thought you sent it to her too, right? If he went to my phone, it must go to hers. And I was like, dude, seriously? Is that just confusion? Anyway, I had that talk last night. It's just cracking me up. But the point is, you guys, 15 to 24-year-olds making the fastest moves, right? So certainly abandoning what was classic online communication in droves and then moving that much faster to social networking. And you're going to see that further push along to the right-hand side of the chart there as we get later in. So again, 2012, 2013, I think you're going to see those other older generations pick up. And so for digital natives and social networking, they pretty much were, as soon as they began having, let's say they hit puberty, right? They have social networking, right? That's the way that they went about communicating. And again, that's the norm, but that's how we're defining a digital native. And these are things that you should think about long term. If that is a group that you intend to be marketing to or capturing at one stage or capturing them right afterward, these are the numbers, right? You can sort of get a sense of email marketing or whatever it's going to be. Social networking is where you have to be in order to capture this group. Number 8, social networking leads in online display advertising. So, last quarter, United States, over 1 trillion display ad impressions. It's a big number, right? A 1, I think it was 12 zeros. Sort of had some fascinating figures we've been talking about around dollars in debt for a long time. But, you're talking about 1 trillion ad impressions served just in the United States, just on PCs, PCs, home and work. 1 in 4 of those impressions appeared on social networks. And in fact, this is a huge motion and something I recommend if you're a display advertiser or you create display ads or you sell them or whatever, is socially enabled ads, right? So in the advertisement, it says, Facebook me, or find us on Facebook, or it has a Facebook or a Twitter, follow us. You click it, where basically the destination is going to be the destination is going to be the social networking site. That's 5% currently, and that number is growing fast. All right, that is only going to go up. And it's been pretty fascinating, especially from a brand advertiser perspective. Think of classic CPG companies that only want to have you inside of their little walled garden, sending you to something that they don't own. Right? They're advertising and sending you someplace else. So, if you think about it, it's about the amount of time. It's all of those numbers that we talked about beforehand. But there are a couple things I want to point out here in just a sec. Despite social networking leading in number of impressions, it's not attracting its fair share of dollars. Right? So it might be 1 out of every 4 display ads is on a social network. But in fact, you guys can see it's only capturing about 15% of display ad spending. Why is that? Some of the things we've been seeing, the reasons for that to be, is that companies are very worried about what they're going to be up against on a social network. Right? If you're a brand advertiser, you have spent probably a lot of money and a lot of time creating and protecting and nurturing that brand. It is your baby. right? It is your brand. You got to take care of this. You don't want it up against anything. And the last thing you need is, like some snot-nosed 15-year-old kid lighting it up with some sort of, racial epithet right next to your great big logo, right? So there's definitely a concern there, and retailers, in fact, are probably the ones that drag their feet the most. Do retailers do an enormous amount of advertising, whether it be online or offline? Do very little advertising on social networks. They just don't do it. So I think we're going to see that catch up at one point. So, again, I just sort of ran through this. These are just further stats, another way to be able to look at this. But Facebook is actually one of the largest publishers. I believe 1 out of every 3 display ads at this, no, 1 out of every 4 display ads at this point. Social networking, I'm mixing up my numbers. Whatever, it's a lot. Right, it's a lot of social networking that's being done, but the fact is a lot of it due to ad networks and the targeting features that you can do on Facebook. It's a lot of long tail stuff. So it's not necessarily always the biggest and the baddest brand advertisers, which is really where the big dollars are long term, just to be on the lookout for. But Facebook, you can see capturing as much as it is, the mass majority of it is long tail. So something else just to be able to consider is display advertising. It might be you spend the most time there, but there's a lot of opportunity, and I think that's also, not that I'm going to get into that Facebook IPO, but I mentioned it earlier, sky's the limit, right, as far as brand advertising dollars that will be done on social networks. And if 3 out of every 4 minutes spent on social networking is on Facebook, there's probably a lot of opportunity there for dollars. Number 9, things to be able to consider in a social world. The next disruptors have yet to be decided, right? So again, we've talked about what happened back in 2007. But look Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Look where everybody was back in 2007. It's like 8 people using these things, right? And now you guys can see, the size of these numbers as far as, reach, number of unique visitors across the board worldwide. It's an enormous number, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people over the course of 4 years were something that pretty much didn't exist. Literally wasn't even in your lexicon. Anybody in 2007 be like, Facebook me? Right? Okay, maybe a couple of you guys are cool enough that you were way out on the cutting edge. I'm not that cool, right? So I certainly was like, Facebook, whatever. Why do I need to tell everybody about what I'm doing? And now I'm on there looking at pictures and commenting on stuff. Cats that are, dressed like police. I don't know, it could be anything. Like whatever I'm in and I'm involved. But who are the next disruptors? There could be something new coming up at any time. Again, there's a couple things to think about. Who are the disruptors? So at any stage, somebody else might come along. There are new things to be able to consider. Google+. Who here is on Google+? All right, a few people on Google+. Now, you guys, at a conference several months ago, I was asked about Google+, sort of like a future of stuff, just like a random think tank panel. And I used a quote that ended up getting tweeted a lot. Got retweeted a lot. It was simple as people were asking me what I thought of Google+. And, and listen, I'll talk a little bit about where it is now, but all I had said is, listen, you go to a restaurant, you don't order half-baked food. I said, nobody wants to eat a half-baked pie, right? I just said that, something as simple as that. Because it came out, had a lot of problems, it wasn't ready for brands, it felt like it was a pre-launch, like whatever it was. Became a big deal. But I can tell you guys, as far as Google+ is concerned, hit 25 million users in about 4 seconds, right? Biggest, fastest social networking launch in history. Now, it's obviously much later in the social networking paradigm, right, as far as that goes, so no surprise. And it's Google, right? It's the biggest property on the planet. Over 1 billion people on the planet visit Google on any given day, and we haven't even gotten to mobile devices yet. But that sort of plateaued, and then it began to go up. But the things to think about, and this is where, if we get into some of the other types of social networks, is if you're going to really make a splash, or the things to be on the lookout for is they got to be offering something different, right? You can't just be as good as Facebook. You've got to be way better. Or you got to be something different, and that's actually what Google goes with. It's really not looking at itself as a social network. It's trying to push itself as an interest network, right? So it's a place where you would go and spend your interest and have not necessarily even friends, but colleagues you might be interacting with. And that's, as you begin to think about those top tier, global social networks, audience size, some of those new things. That's where I talk about Tumblr, Baidu, just some of the things that you guys will see in the future. You got to be a little bit different. You got to have something different than one of the big boys on the block. You can't just come in, throw money at the problem. And that's really why I think Google+ has taken a different direction. They finally began to get into, brands. Brands finally were able to sign up, which again, that's where the long-term dollars are. But these are actually a couple other things. Whoa. So, glad that completely lost down the left there. But those are other social networks that aren't listed for some reason. They're not showing up. But the one I really wanted to point, see that Second from the bottom, 512%, Pinterest. Anybody in here use Pinterest? Know what it is? Guys, you should check it out. It's actually one of the big new things. Pinterest is just where you create online pin boards. It's like scrapbooking. You get to create books, and you just take any image that you see on the net, and you pin it to your pin boards, and you share it with your friends. It's seen enormous growth. We started tracking it back in May. It was at however many unique visitors at that time, 5, right, 10. And now you're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7 million. I mean, the enormous growth that we've seen there, it's something that gets you away from any sort of posting and commenting about different stuff. It's all image-based. Just something you guys should check out. If you ask me, I wrote a column about it, some of the stats, a couple months ago, but that was the one that I wanted to put here, of something new, some sort of angle in social networking that somebody is not already using or taking advantage of. That's really where I think you're going to see a lot of the grand social networking growth over the course of the next bunch of months or couple of years. And the last thing, and we talked about it before in the opening piece, mobile. Mobile's kind of important, right? What type of device you're using. Do you have an iPad? Do you have a Kindle Fire? Do you have an iPhone? Do you have a Microsoft? I have a Microsoft phone, believe it or not. And none of my companies that I use can make apps for it. So I've been sending emails being like, where's a Microsoft app? And they're like, yeah, no dice. Like, yeah, appreciate it, guys. Can't take the time. It's 10% of the market. But social networking penetration in mobile markets, I mean, you guys can see it's high across the board and only going to get higher, right? People are certainly posting things. I mean, we talked about it before, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, via their mobile device. Smartphones is really what's driving a lot of that, right? You basically at this point have what are called smartphones, which we're all pretty familiar with, and if you're not, probably in the wrong room, and then what you call feature phones. And believe it or not, people still buy feature phones in drove. They are big, but it was about late fall, so the first time in the United States in history, the amount of not only existing phones, the amount of new phones that were being purchased, finally over 50% of them became smartphones. So smartphones are about 40% of the entire market right now as far as share is concerned. But soon enough, based on that number, we're all going to have smartphones that will keep moving. And that's really what's driving, smartphones are set up for accessing mobile media, mobile internet and social networking in any capacity. And you guys can see some of the numbers. I'm not going to have to read them to you, but that's really what's driving a lot of that adoption and will moving forward. But the thing that's funny about it is, depending upon country, the UK being representative here, is that everything's not just mobile apps and mobile browsers. A lot of companies haven't taken the time. We talked about it before, about not creating a mobile website or not having a mobile app. You still have to go to the classic internet on your mobile device in order to view a site. You can see how big that number is. Highly recommend, in the future, create a mobile site, right? Take the money, take the time. Now, a mobile app, that might be more expensive. That's a different business decision. But coming up with an actual mobile optimized website is going to be hugely important moving forward. And then also from a mobile social networking perspective, what are they using it for, right? They're posting status updates, reading posts. My favorite on here is read posts from public figures and celebrities. Right, that is number 4 on the list, using social networking to be like, what did Angelina Jolie say this morning about stuff? But it is still a big deal. Everybody's using it. And the last one there, though, is also receive coupons, offers, and deals. This is going to be a big driver from a retail perspective. CPG companies, retail organizations, people using coupons via their mobile devices and cashing them in. Even if it's as simple as walking up to the Coke machine, swiping it, and getting 5 cents off. Right? Impulse buy, believe it or not. Coke, actually, they see that as an impulse buy. It's not a branding thing. That's actually a different discussion, but it was just an interesting thing when I had dinner with those guys one time. And then also tablets. Tablets, the experience on a tablet is different than it is on your mobile device. So when you guys think about it, when you're thinking about now you can optimize search campaigns and display ads for iPads and different Android devices and doing different things on mobile phones. I can tell you, I'm not going to get into it too deep here, but there are other things I have a lot of data on I'd be happy to share with you. The way that people use their iPads and their tablets is a lot different than the way that they use their smartphones. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that now that you can target things very specifically, think about it as what goes on a tablet actually mirrors what happens on regular computers a lot more than it does on smartphones and mobile. How are we for time, by the way? Anybody got a time for me? Pretty good? Anyway, whatever, you guys get back to me, tell me if I'm going too long. I'm almost done. And then we'll go into Q&A. But I just want to point that out. You guys can see just some of the incremental reach. The future of mobile social networking absolutely is going to be tablets as well as smartphones, but a combination of those. But you just need to remember, if you have the time, you got to treat the different devices in different ways, even different platforms, right? Different operating systems. So we're witnessing dawn of new, truly connected era, right? Everybody's involved. Social networks, we talk to everybody all the time. Everybody's posting pictures of stuff. You know what everybody had for breakfast. You know what everybody's wearing that day. It's going to make a difference, and mobile technology is really going to be a big driver to that. So you guys, I mean, to close it out, this is the top 10 things, really, when we think about, you know, at a comScore being sort of the center of like talking about stuff, understanding statistics and what we're seeing the trends. These top 10 things, I'm not going to go through all of them since you guys can read and we've already run through them all anyway. But really, you know, the things number 1 and number 10 to me are the most important. It is the most popular activity worldwide, and mobile devices, which is the future of everything, is absolutely driving where we are now, and it's going to drive it long term. And I'll even just give you guys one stat I'll close with. Here in the United States, anybody want to take a guess out of all of the online activity right now, just across the entire internet, how much is on mobile devices versus regular internet? 50%. 93% of all online activity right now is still on PCs, right? Only 7% of the online activity, period, is on a mobile device in the United States. So you guys can imagine, think about how often you use a mobile device, but think about it, when you're at work, you're doing work on your actual computer, and you're at home, things like that. There is an enormous area of growth to be had as it relates to the experience you're gonna have on your mobile devices and how that fits in with social networking and everything else. And that is the end. That's it. So I have no idea how much time is left. They told me to turn off my cell phone. We got 5 minutes. Oh, that was longer than I thought. Q&A, questions. You guys, I'm happy to answer anything. If not, I will answer it later.
Yeah, you had one slide up there that was showing growing social networks, and
Yeah.
the labels got left off.
Yes, I gotta get those to you. They were totally not, they're in the presentation. I don't know why they didn't show up. So which ones were they? Pinterest was the one that comes up the most, right?
How do you spell that?
Oh, like interest, like I am interested in
Pinterest,
something
okay.
with a P.
Okay.
Pinterest. That was the big one that I wanted to point out there. I mean, the others are things that you guys are familiar with. You know, when you talk about like LinkedIn and the growth there, you know, Twitter, of course, but then some of the international ones like Weibo and whatnot, that's what made out that list. But we'll get you a copy of the presentation so you'll be able to see all of them.
Great. I wanted to ask you about the difference between mobile devices, smartphones and cell phones versus maybe tablet and second screen. And even though I'm in my house, I'm not in my study at the desk on my computer, I'm using a different device. Is that still in the mobile, or is that a new thing, or is that in an old thing, or where would you put kind of?
Well, we define mobile.
tablets?
Mobile is based really on device, right? So if you think of mobile as anything that is not tethered to the ground, as in like your PC, right? Like a desktop or a laptop is a computer. So a mobile could be tablet of any kind, right? Your smartphone could even be just your feature phone. So, you know, if you're using something that you're wandering around the house, I mean, do you have an example of something?
Like a tablet, you know.
Yeah,
the whole
tablet's a mobile
second
device.
screen in the house, but you're not, you know, you're not driving around trying to get where you want to be localized and
Right.
digitalized, that, you know, you want a florist that, you know, is right next to you or something like that, versus you're using the tablet as a device that does need a different app or interface or something.
Yes, so we absolutely define that as a mobile device, but I can tell you guys it's interesting when you get into the activities that are taking place on them. That example is why tablets actually mirror like what people are doing online on PCs a lot more than they do with smartphones. So that's why, you know, if you were to go in right now, if you had a Google AdWords account, you could target different messages from search to an iPad versus somebody's iPhone. Right? So the ways and what people are doing on those is very, very different, and I'd be happy to talk about it later, get you some data about different things that people are doing on different
And
devices.
just real quickly, I know as a second, TVs and smart TVs and the integration of TV and mobile and social and video and app, and do you see trends there? Or anything
Yeah, there's
you work?
absolutely huge trends there. We don't have a huge TV panel, right, to be able to give you like what's happening at this stage, but I have some places I could direct you. If you want to take my card later, I'd be happy to get you some information.
Yeah, I had a question.
Please, yeah.
You know, you were talking about the next disruptors.
Yeah.
Facebook is so big who's to say they wouldn't just absorb anything that was actually trendy and just incorporate it into their overall package? And
They absolutely can, right? But at the same time, think about it. I think that Google tried to buy Facebook at one point, tried to buy Twitter. I think everybody tried to buy the different ones. And all, it depends on what the needs are, right? A lot of times, and you could probably ask Biz Stone about this, right? Tomorrow or the next day, is a lot of guys that have something that are popular, maybe they already cashed out. They already made their money. Right? So they're not necessarily there just to get bought. They want to be able to change something. So there's a lot of other factors that go in. I'm sure that somebody will get swallowed up along the way that would be like, this is the new thing, and somebody comes and throws cash at you, money, an offer, the Godfather offer, something you can't refuse. But I think there's a lot of other factors that go into, even something as simple as ego, right? In order to be like, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to change the world and I'm going to do this versus selling out. So there are a couple things of, when you think about it, there are things you could steal ideas of, right? And that's actually what we tend to call the network effect. Okay, so when Foursquare, for example, comes out with checking in, and it becomes a big deal, and then Facebook's like, Facebook Places, check in everywhere. And now, 95% of people that check in somewhere check in with Facebook at one time or another over the course of the month. But there's also a lot of other things that come to audience as well, where it's just not as simple. And another example would just be Google+. Right? Google+, well, we got the new thing. Well, why should I jump from Facebook to Google+ if it's not doing anything different? So there's absolutely going to be stealing along the way, right? But there are some things that can't be recreated, and one of the most important ones is audience and passion by that said audience, that tends to drive a lot of growth of these things. And then the fourth, I'm not a tech guy, but sometimes you probably can't just build stuff out of nowhere, right? I'm sure that could be a potential problem as well. So I think you'll probably see both, along the way. Please.
Hi, Rob Hall with Momentous. I think you said in the digital native world that you're seeing instant messaging dropping like a rock, not being taken up as much. Does that include texting and, for lack of a better word, perhaps new services such as the iMessage, which are more of, for lack of a better word, an app or something like that? Do you have any stats on what's happening in that world?
I do not have texting stats at the moment, at least not like off the top of my head. I do have a lot of mobile stuff that we do, and I can show you how many people are texting, but instant messaging is not seen as texting in that instance.
So
it's about visiting and using like instant messaging apps.
So you're seeing those decline and not being used on mobile phones, but it's
Correct.
possible that's being replaced by new apps such as iMessage or texting increase. Is that
Right, as far as like, SMS and texting and whatnot, that's really seen as a bit of a different thing. So when you look at those figures, think of it as just pure internet communication as opposed to texting is suddenly dropping through the floor, because that's not the case.
Got it. Thank you.
Please.
I have a question about social communities. And I'm wondering, with the Latin American and Spanish communities, if you track the connections between countries. A lot of the Hispanics are right here in the United States, and you have Spain. So are there social connections? Someone in Argentina, are they spending a lot of time in social with Spain, with Mexico, or are they sort of in their countries?
You know what? They absolutely, everybody spends a lot of time across countries just based on we're a pretty global world. I don't have a figure, though, that says Argentinians spend this much time with people from Spain versus other folks. I just don't have that type of qualitative assessment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Eli. It was
Right,
great
thank
to
you,
have
guys.
you back this year. Let's give him a round of applause. Just a couple of very quick announcements. Deborah?
Thank you. Thank you, Eli. And as you said at the beginning, that's why I put you after me, because you're such a good speaker. We're going to have lunch starting at 12:30 under the fig tree. And for those of you that are going to dine with the experts, that'll be in the Malibu Bungalow. And then we'll be getting together again at 2 o'clock for a very good panel discussion on mobile. So look forward to seeing you this afternoon. Thank you.
Or is it just our fate? And how will